Hi, I'm Jack Moon, and my special guest today is my good friend Mark Tonelli.
How you going?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. So let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
And what got you into music?
Initially, it was the Beatles, and it was the Beatles cartoons, which I used to see every morning before going to school. And I didn't realise at the time it was a real band. And I put the TV on, and there's just this great music came out. And so the next morning, I thought I have to put that show on again to hear that song, those songs, you know.
So this would have been around the 1970s, and of course the cartoon came out in the mid-60s. So you kind of missed out on a decade of the Beatles in one way, but I know they've been very influential on your music.
Yeah, well, this was 1975, I think. I was 10 years old, so it just goes to show it was just the power of the music on its own. There was no, publicity about it or no promotional sort of thing. It was just the sound. I remember being blown away by the sound of Lennon McCartney's voice, the sound of the Rickenbackers and guitar and Gretsch guitars through the Vox amps, although I didn't know it at the time. What was going on, but just it was something different, and so it was just the merits of the music.
Is that what got you into playing the guitar? Is that what attracted you?
Yeah, it was, because later on, I playing the guitar became like a vehicle to try and recreate the emotion those songs gave me, And it was trying to, wow, that just it'd be great if you could just do that with a guitar. So that's how that started, and then eventually it was the sound of the guitar, the different expressions the guitar could give you, came into the picture.
Yeah. So let's just get off script for a little bit, just briefly, because we're both guitarists and we both love the tones that a guitar and an amp, the combination, can produce, and that takes quite a bit of work. There is the British sound, there is the American sound, and I know we'll touch on those as we get on through the interview. But for any budding guitarists out there that about to plug in their guitar into an amp for the first time, just describe briefly what it is that these young guys are going to have to look for.
Well, there's a few different opinions on that. Some people say it's all in the fingers, and I'm no expert. I don't profess to be an expert at it, but I think it's a combination of it being you physically bringing the sound out, and for me it was what I was hearing in my head, and then trying to make it happen, with electric guitar, even with acoustic to some extent. Trying to make it happen physically, and then you've got the luxury of all the controls on an amplifier, and which you can sort of tailor it to what you're hearing. Yeah, the sound is obviously part of it, so it's a whole combination of the sound, but really it's the songs. For me, the songs were the things that blew me away, and then to top it off, the icing was the sound, So, I mean, those songs sound great if you're playing them on acoustic guitar or piano or whatever. So,
so were there any artists or particular albums that you drew inspiration from?
Yeah, lots. See if I can remember. The ones that come to mind, the first was obviously Beatles, the rock and roll album. It was a compilation album, a double album, and had all sort of different stuff. And then I remember listening to Hunky Dory, David Bowie's Hunky Dory, and really loving Mick Ronson's playing, very melodic. Angus and Malcolm, it was Highway to Hell, blew me away. Angus, both their playing, they're just rock solid and raw. And also Paul Weller in the Jam, and Pete Townsend. Paul Weller drew a lot from Pete Townsend, but all those sort of players had a vulnerability and an honesty and a sincerity to to my ears about their playing, you know.
Yeah, you know, we spoke just recently, and you were telling me how Paul Weller had a melodic style, and Townsend, you admire that aggressiveness in his playing.
Paul Weller had an aggressiveness too, and I think they both had, you know, melodic and an aggressive sort of tones in depending what they were playing. But Weller for me was the Beatles were the reason I wanted to become a musician, but Paul Weller was the reason I actually went out and did it. And so yeah, both great influences.
As a young man, you went to London and Europe, and how important was that London experience to your musical development?
Well, I cut my teeth as a musician in London. I was, after discovering the Beatles and the guitar, I was just totally obsessed with it. And it sounds a bit, you know, strange, but most artists can relate. That was the most important thing in the world for me. I just had this emotional connection to it, you know. So I decided that I was going to go to the place that it started it, the country that it started it for me. So I saved up some money when I was, I think, 18, 19, and you know, got on a plane.
I mean, that was a big deal back then. I mean, we all know travel is, you know, inexpensive these days, but that would have cost a small fortune back then.
Well, I'd saved up for a couple of years, I think it was 2-3 years, just doing, you know, all sorts of jobs. But I had this conviction, you know, and I never really felt like I fit doing anything else. You know, I think a lot of artists can sort of relate to that. I don't know why, I just got this solace from music and playing guitar. You know, it just gave me a real purpose, and it was a one-dimensional sort of thing.
You really had a direction that like a mission that you were.
I wanted to go to London and go, you know, get involved with a band and make music, and so I remember getting off the plane at Heathrow Airport and shitting myself, not literally, but just getting on that, you know, on the tarmac and thinking, right, no turning back now, and my heart's beating. And
you had it's not like you had any pre-arrangement, any friends there or anyone to stay with, is that right? You got off the plane and it was really, well, where do I go from here?
No, I didn't know anybody. I had booked like a bed and breakfast in a place called Lancaster Gate, and so it took, you know, a number of weeks to sort of settle in, and maybe a month or two, and then I started going for auditions, and I auditioned for this band, and they were called Kissing Kowalski, and I got the gig, and then we started gigging, travelling up and down the country, and then did some recordings, and then we ended up in Europe, in Amsterdam. And that was a blast, because what had happened, we'd made up our minds to get all chip in and buy a van, and so we could travel around Europe. It was an ex-furniture removal van. It was a Dodge, and we decked it out and we put seats in it. And so we travelled to Amsterdam, and when we got to Amsterdam, we moved into the first probably 5 days we were just sleeping in the van on the street, and then in the morning the cops would be knocking on the window, move on. So this went on for about 5-6 days, and then we got a gig busking. So in Dam Square in Central Station, front of the Central Station. And then we met this guy who was an ex-Vietnam vet, and he said, his name was Ron, and he said, come stay with us, man. And he was living in the back of the Amsterdam Zoo in a hippie commune. So we thought, great, a place to go. And so we, during the day, we'd acquired a position busking, and we had a couple of car batteries that would power the amplifiers, and the drummer had a stand-up sort of kit. And then we progressed to some clubs, a place called the Paradiso Club, Milk Veg, I think it was called, and then the outskirts of Amsterdam, and it was a total adventure.
Yeah, I hear somewhere along that journey you picked up a Rickenbacker guitar that has a bit of a story.
Well, the Rickenbacker I'd purchased the Rickenbacker in London, and I wanted a black Rickenbacker, so I found a place that was called Monkey Business in London Road, Croydon, and so I went down there. They had this great price, and I wanted a black Rickenbacker like Paul Weller's, and they had this red one hanging up there, so I said, no, I want a black. Oh, well, they're trying to sell me this red one. No, well, I said, you have to wait. It takes a month to get this black one in. I said, okay, I'll wait. Anyway, so the black one eventually came in. I was happy. But when we were touring around Amsterdam and Germany, it started getting dinged up, and I started noticing all these little red bits on it.
You've got that guitar here. Let's have a look at it. I mean,
and I said to the bass player, what do you make of this? He said, well, this guitar was initially red. And I went, you bastards. So I don't know if you can see there bits of red, if it's going to show up.
Yeah, there it is. You did all the London and Europe touring as a young guy with that guitar.
Yeah, this is 86 I bought this, and it's still going, and it's part of my life.
Yeah,
so it's a lot of memories. This thing's been with me all the way from the beginning.
Right, so with 4 years abroad and a gold mine of experience, you hop on a plane and come back to Melbourne, and you hook up with a guy called Steve Boyd and a band called In Spirit. Tell us about that.
Well, I'd gone for this audition. I didn't know Steve, and they were looking for a guitar player, so I'd audition, and I got the gig. And Steve's he still is an amazing songwriter, and he's like the mad scientist of creativity. He's just got all these ideas, and I was really impressed with him, and I was impressed with the band, and it was probably one of the most productive and at the same time craziest. I think it was about a year and a half. We did a lot of gigs. We did a lot of writing and recording and rehearsing, and just great band and great guys to play with.
So you really threw yourself back into it right off the plane.
Yeah,
It's good. And you also hooked up, I believe it was John Lee, who was the drummer for the Dingo.
Yeah, John Lee. I met John Lee through a guy I'd met called Rock Latanzio, who's a great producer, engineer, and he rang me up one afternoon. He said, I've got this guy in the studio who's played with Steve Marriott. And Steve Marriott was one of my heroes, and I said, bullshit. And he said, I'm serious, you got to come down. I said, I'm going to come down, but if this is a joke, you're going to cop it, right? So I got down there, and there's this guy, John Lee, and he was a great drummer, and I loved drummers like that, sort of Charlie Watts and Ringo, pocket drummers, and we just got on great from the start. And he was swigging. It was a hot day, and I thought he had this jar of water, and so I had a sip of this, and it was just vodka. And
I mean, really, there's nothing worse than musicians getting together and having some type of alcohol in their hands.
But he could play. So Johnny Lee, we got on, and he said, why don't we put a band together, a three-piece band. I never played in a three-piece band. And I remember rehearsing with him, and the bass player name was Andy, I think. And we were doing Hard to Handle, the song that I think who was the band that covered that?
Well, a lot of guys did it. A lot of bands did it.
Anyway.
It was a lot of bands.
So I was kind of going. I had no idea. I thought I was three-piece band. You got to fill as much as possible. So I was like, stop. You're playing too much. All you got to do is ta 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 ta. Okay, so I'm okay. Well, big smile on his face. Me and Andy, the bass player, we're taking care of the rest. And it stayed with me, guitar parts. So it was great. And he'd said to me, this guy could keep time like nobody else could, just unbelievable. And he said, if I start a time, don't ever turn around to me and say, pick it up or slow it down. So months later we were playing. I thought, I'm going to test him out. So I turned around and said, Johnny, pick it up. And he's got this look on his face. Gotcha. And then he was laughing. But yeah, he was a beautiful guy to play with,
Jerome Smith is a New York-born musician, now living in Melbourne. And Jerome gigged with the likes of Keith Richards, The Persuaders, Mick Jagger, Billy Thorpe, Ian Moss and the Divinals. And Jerome's a good mate of yours, and he's been a major influence on you.
Jerome's amazing. Jerome is like the walking encyclopedia of songs. I was listening to Keith Richards' solo albums, Main Offender and Talk Is Cheap, and I was just getting off on those albums, and I didn't know anybody who knew those, So I used to go in the music store and just play guitars, and they, D tune to open G. So one day I was just playing these songs, and minutes later I felt this presence behind me, and I heard this guy says, I thought it was the man himself, and I turned around and I said, oh, you know this stuff? He goes, yeah, man, that's great. I thought, what a cool guy, he knows these albums. And I had no idea he'd played with Keith and all these people. So weeks later, I was in the store and he pulled me aside and he said, do you want to do some gigs? I said, yeah, sure. So he gave me these 30 songs to learn. So I went home and I learned all the songs and charting stuff out. And we get to the gig and I said, what are we doing? And he says, we'll just do some tunes, 10 minutes before we go on, I have no idea what we're doing. 5 minutes before we go on, I've still no idea what we're doing. And there's about probably 250 people there, and I'm prepared. And he turns around to the drummer and cues the drummer in sort of James Brown style, establishing the beat. And then he just turns to me and says, Hendrix in A. So all I've got is a key, and I thought, well, distortion. And he starts this song, and it's this long intro, and it was California Dreamin', his own version. Jerome's great at arranging, and it really felt great, and I really felt like I was playing guitar well, and just everything flowed. It was just you can't explain it. It was just a great feeling, and that was. I don't know, when that was about 12 years ago, maybe more. Jerome
has this magnificent presence on stage. He really makes a statement, doesn't he?
He is. He's a natural. He's just, you just either connect or you don't with people, with players, and there was a connection. And of course, Richie, he's great. He's part of that band. He's been part of it. I met Richie through Jerome too. So, yeah, we just got a chemistry going. We have, but yeah, it's been a blessing. And Jerome brings out the best in people, And I've learnt a lot from Jerome, and I'm still learning from Jerome. We like to hang and talk music
But you gig with Jerome and Richie in the Covering Addicts.
That's the band, yeah, Covering Addicts, yeah.
During the 1970s, one of our greatest Australian bands was Stars, fronted by Mick Peeling, and featured the songs of one of our most amazing songwriters, Andy Durant. In 2013, Mick Peeling put a band together to honour the songs of Andy Durant, and in the band was our own Mark Tonelli. Tell us about it.
Well, I'd been playing with Mick. I met Mick through Chris Wilson, a keyboard player. And I think it was about a year later or so, Mick wanted to put a show together doing the songs of Andy Durant. Same kind of thing that was done, I think, in the 80s. Excuse me. And we all agreed, and it was a really fantastic experience. Andy Durant's songs they're just very clever songs, very unorthodox sort of songs, and I felt like I sort of got to know the person through the songs. I didn't know much about Stars or Andy, and it was a really great experience.
Yeah, well, you worked alongside, you worked with Gary Young, another guitarist. How did you work the two guitar parts out? How did you decide who was going to play what part?
There was a huge amount of work in that. He's a great collaborator. He's a great team guitar player, and we got on straight away. And so the thing was, the number one priority was to do the songs justice, and how are we going to approach it? But it was pointless trying to replicate what Malistic and what Andy was doing to the T. That's never going to happen. So we put a lot of work into trying to work out, okay, well, we'll keep these important parts, but the certain, like the guitar harmonies, but certain other things, we could just kind of put our own personalities and our own input into it. So we spent hours and hours of rehearsing it. And it was successful, I think. And the one of the biggest buzzes was at the end of the first concert, the first gig at the Flying Saucer Club. We had guys who were Stars fans from the day coming up saying that was really great. And it meant a lot because, those were guys which were listening to that band in that period, and it was a personal thing for them.
Well, I can tell you, I was there that night, so I saw the show, and that's pretty much how I went to it. Right. It was a really fine effort, yeah. I mean, and they're not easy songs to play. There's a lot of diversity in those songs.
There is. We did a lot of rehearsal, but we had a great band. We had Joe Imbrol on bass, Robbo, Peter Robson, Chris Wilson, and and Mick's great to work with. Mick knew, what made those songs tick. He was very, very easy to work with, and it's just a blast working with someone like that because he's been doing it for so long, and he's got a certain energy on stage, and it rubs off on you. So I feel very sort of privileged to have done that.
So you've also worked with drummer Alex Baldo. Now Alex was behind the Mark Hunter tribute concert, and how did you get involved in that show?
Drummer, singer, songwriter as well. He's a bit of a all-rounder, Alex. I'd been playing with Alex same period I met Mick, so I happened to be playing with Alex, and got on great with him, and he had this idea that he wanted to do a tribute show for his friend, because Mark Hunter was his friend, and so I had I've still got a 12-string Rickenbacker guitar, and he said, well, how would you feel about doing a couple of songs just with a 12-string Rick and vocals? Great. So we did that, and then I think one song was just like with a band, and so it was something different.
So also on the stage was Ian Moss, Rick Formosa, who was a founding member of LRB, Dale Ryder and John Swan. What was it like sharing a stage with that calibre musician?
Amongst many others. Fantastic. The energy amongst the people playing was fantastic. They were there for the right reasons. The energy in the audience and the crowd was awesome. It was just one of those magic nights, because the whole show was flying by the seat of its pants, and it was so much, and Alex did a brilliant job in putting it all together. He knew what made those songs tick, and I remember at sound check even people rehearsing, the night of the show, like getting their shit together.
I remember you telling me, it was really cool, you were telling me that people were turning up and saying, well, what am I going to do? And still wanting their parts with 2 hours to go on stage.
Yeah, well, there's something in that, that sort of off the cuff, that sort of, when you put on the spot, I think that's where the magic comes from. And it could have been it was either going to be a complete train wreck or brilliant. No in between, and it was brilliant, and I think people who were there that night would agree. It was just the magic in the air.
All right, so you've worked alongside Jerome Smith, Mick Peeling, and Alex Baldo. So these guys have played with the likes of Waddy Wattell, who's played on God knows how many hits. And what was it about your playing that led them to choose you to gig with these guys?
I don't know, you'd probably have to ask them, but I would imagine I'd consider myself a team player and a guitar player that plays for the song rather than just, playing guitar to try and impress people. So I guess it's about, them being comfortable with having someone who's willing to play for the song and do it justice, and being able to work as a team. I guess, I don't know, you'd have to ask them personally. I guess, they're looking for something, and I happen to be able to provide that something, I guess.
Now, you've written some clever songs. Is there a Mark Tonelli album on the way?
I've written some shit songs as well. Out of all the shit, there's some good stuff. I've got some things in the pipeline. It's just getting it, the right time and the right players to get together. So I'm hoping to do something really real soon and put that out.
Well, if you can find a part for a piano accordion, I'll bring my piano accordion down.
Yeah.
I'll do a track for you.
And the
ukulele.
Ukulele, yeah.
I'll do that too. I know we're going to have you back on live at Jack's place to do a couple of songs as well in the near future. Yep.
Sure, I'd love to do that.
Yeah. All right, Mark, so what are your current musical activities?
I've got my band, The Main Offenders, which we do rock and roll stuff from sort of J.J. Cale to, Beatles, Stones, a lot of some rockabilly. So it's a mixture between, I guess, rockabilly, blues and rock and roll.
Yeah. Who's in the band?
Joe Imbrol is on bass, and a guy called David Piccone. Pickles.
Yeah.
And I'm still playing with Jerome Smith, covering Addicts. And I've been playing with a guy called Paul Brown, who's...
That's an acoustic thing?
Acoustic Crocodiles. Paul's overseas at the moment. He'll be back real soon. He's great to work with. That's the main thing.
That's
and
good.
Still just writing and recording.
Well, mate, that's a wrap. It's been great having you on Chat with Jack. Thank you, Mark Tonelli.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on. It's been an absolute blast. Cheers.
We did it. Well done, mate. It's good.
Thank you. Good stuff.
Yeah. Recommended for all musicians and singers and bald-headed babies.
I think we should use a sample guitar. It'll sound much better than me.